like a countdown that is happening.
What's the what?
I think she said she felt like there was a countdown that was happening.
Oh no, it's just a slow Wi-Fi. Hi everyone, as everyone's getting settled in, we're gonna wait about 5 minutes for everyone to log in and get settled, and then we'll start the session. Until then, if you're not a panel speaker or the moderator, please keep your microphones on mute. Your video cameras are optional. If you want us to see your smile, we more than welcome that. If you're kind of camera shy, you're more than welcome to turn it off. And if you prefer, please put your preferred pronouns in your username so we know how to properly address you. And we will have questions for all the speakers. If you have questions now, feel free to put it in the chat room. Either Ronnie or myself will bring it to Peggy's attention later on for her to ask the panel.
And if you do, for whatever reason, want to maintain privacy, you could send a message to Peggy, Romy, or me, and we won't mention that it's from you. Or you could certainly have those dialogues in open chat.
I think for the next session, as we wait for people to come in, I'm gonna have hold music. It's a little weird on Zoom waiting for giving the extra time for people to come in.
Yeah, I don't even want to start introducing everyone until you feel that all of our attendees are here.
Oh, they're not all going to be in right away. That's what we've learned.
We try to give about, we try to give about 5 to 10 minutes for people to log in because we know people.
Well, we give 5 minutes, then we start, and then we expect that more people will come after those 5 minutes are done.
Yeah,
and even after 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you'll still see new people.
And that's fine. It's just that I've sent everybody timing on the responses to the questions. So let's push everything back, guys, because we'll be starting 5 minutes later, but I'll try to give us the same amount of time to address each of the topics and for each of you to have an opportunity to comment on them.
No worries. We'll begin in about 1 minute. Great, I think we'll get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Romy Longvilai. I am the Travel Unity Board of Directors President, and I'll be your Zoom contact for today. Behind the scenes, we have a great moderator with us today, Peggy Bindle of Bindle Communications International. She's a globally recognized expert in travel marketing, crisis communications, and media training. She's worked with clients all over the world, from Australia to Arizona to California to Chile, and multiple other countries. She's also played an integral role in a very famous campaign you might be familiar with called I Love New York. So she played an integral role in that. She's also been awarded by, she's also been recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Hospitality Sales and Marketing Association International. So we're very honored to have Peggy Bindle of Bindle Communications International as today's moderator. With that being said, I will hand it off to you after a few more little announcements. For those who came in a little bit late, we're asking everyone, unless you're speaking, to have your microphone off. Video cameras are totally optional. If you want to see us, if you want us to see you smile, we welcome that. If you're shy, you're more than welcome to turn it off. And please, we encourage everyone to put your preferred pronouns in your username so we know how to properly address you. And if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat room, and we'll make sure that Peggy sees it for later in the session. That being said, Peggy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to make one little offer. I'm also the author of It's a Crisis, Now What? I can't, there we go. I'll put it right in front of my face. And I'm happy to send a copy to anybody who'd like it. Just include your name and mailing address in the chat, and it'll be on its way. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists in terms of alphabetically by their last name, which means Neha Ahora, who is actually on this panel, the person in the time zone farthest from the core convention organizing. Neha is in India, and her company is called Planet Abled. I'm sure you can tell from the name of the company that she's focusing on travel for people who are differently abled, and she grew up in such an environment. Her childhood vacations were primarily to her grandparents and to other friends in nearby areas where she could be sure that her father, who was in a wheelchair, and her mother, who was blind, would be able to be comfortable and able to see what it is they traveled there to experience. She's worked for Adobe and realized as she became aware that other families were facing the same challenges, that there was no solution for it. There was no place to go for that kind of advice. And so left Adobe and started Planet Abled. Donna Harrison, thank you, Donna L. Harrison, for joining us at the last minute. She's from Chattanooga Tourism, and they are initiating a DEAI program for Chattanooga Tourism, and Donna is leading this initiative. She's the Director of Cultural Tourism and Inclusive Marketing for Chattanooga. Her role is to enhance and amplify brand awareness of the cultural heritage and arts partners through a variety of marketing efforts. Forgive me for reading this, but we were just able to snag Donna by the last minute, so I haven't had a chance to absorb it all. But they'll be doing PR, digital marketing, blogs, and community engagement. She also will be creating inclusive marketing strategies that will pardon me, enhance a diverse and inclusive brand voice for Chattanooga, as well as community engagement and event planning and partnerships for the organization. Sitting to her left on your screen, or at least on my screen, is Margie Jordan, who is also in the same time zone welcome Margie, as Donna. She started her career in the travel industry in 2005 by creating a boutique luxury travel business in Florida that caters to the needs of very exclusive clientele. Social media was wisely in those days, and today her tool of choice to grow and expand the business and share her travel adventures around the world. I know as we get to talking about specific topics, she's going to have a great deal to contribute in terms of examples of good and bad advocating for visitors. You'll also find her live on air in Jacksonville, Florida, as a trusted industry expert by local news stations. So Donna, you and Margie have something in common. You might want to chat about that after this show and get to know each other a little bit better. She's an advisory board member with Travel Unity and sits on the Black Travel Advisory Board with North Star Travel Media, who many of us know, as she works to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in the travel industry, which of course is the point of today's discussion. Billy Kolber is a New York native, but he's speaking to us from Frankfurt, Germany, unless you've moved on since our last conversation last week, Billy. He's the founder of Hospitable Me and a leading voice in the LGBTQ plus travel industry, and the co-founder of Out and About, which was the first gay and lesbian travel magazine in the US, and Man About World, which is one of the first mobile-only magazines of any kind. With his team, they provide education, training, and welcoming service to diverse to destinations and brands to provide more inclusive, authentic, personalized, and welcoming service to diverse travelers. He has a BA in biology, an interesting background for a travel industry person from Yale, and sang around the world with the Yale Whiffenpoops. If we have a little extra time, we might ask to hear a little of his talents. He's worked as a commercial photographer, chocolatier, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Billy, top-selling Avon representative, which I think might be your most unique qualification, author and guest experience consultant. He has visited 72 countries, updated from 71 just last week, Billy, on your bio, but still is anchored in New York City. And so without further ado, I'd like to, because our time is short for everything we have to discuss today, ask our panelists to comment, and you can just raise your hand or unmute you, however you want to do that. I believe everybody can unmute themselves. What are the greatest challenges in advocating for visitors? Each of you has a different perspective on that, but I think we'll find some commonality here, and we'll give ourselves 8 to 10 minutes to chat.
I'll lead off. I mean, I
Great.
think the biggest challenge is understanding that visitors need advocacy, understanding that, you know, we come from an industry that is so built upon this paradigm of white heterosexual couples, primarily from the US and Western Europe, traveling around the world after World War II. You know, our industry was built on this paradigm, and that's not who's traveling anymore. I mean, those people are still traveling, but it's a broad world of people who are traveling. And I think understanding that different guests experience destinations differently, experience marketing differently, need to see themselves represented in your destination, and may need changes on the ground in order to feel welcome and comfortable. I think that's the biggest challenge, is the first one, just recognizing that there is an issue.
Hey, Peggy, I would like to jump in as well. First of all, I want to say thank you on behalf of Chattanooga Tourism Company for allowing us to be here. And I do agree with Billy as well, but I want to make some additions to that. One of the hardest challenges, especially I can say in this city, and I've also seen it and heard from other people in other destinations, is that basically everybody's not on board. And it's okay when everybody is not initially on board. And I'm meaning our partners, meaning like some of our major attractions. It might be some people that are internally that are not on board, and in meeting staff. And it also might be people just in general that are just not on board because they haven't had the opportunity for inclusive marketing and market to those tourists. So it's different, right? So when it comes to something like this, you know, we always think about meeting people where they are. And I always hear the same phrase: you invite people to the party, and do they feel welcome when they get there? But there's also another part to that phrase that I thought about the other day. So I ask you to dance, I make you feel comfortable, but I'm stepping on your toes, right? So if I'm stepping on your toes, how am I going to treat you once you can't pick up those steps? I'm going to treat you with grace. So what we have to understand is that as we start this process, as we welcome these new visitors, as we make sure that we have different people from all walks of life visiting our destinations, we have to also understand that everybody's not on board, but they can be if we do it slowly but surely and lead by example. And even if they're different, even if we don't agree, we respect them enough to want them to know more about our destinations.
Beha, would you like to make a comment
Sure.
on the challenges?
Yeah. So I think the challenge that lies here is that people with disabilities are not even considered as a paying customer at most of the places. Like, they are not even considered as a target audience where the destinations or even the travel companies or even the host or the hoteliers would like to market to them specially and to cater to their needs. It's just more of less as a checkpoint. Yeah, we are good people and we do it for them, but it's not a potential market, not realizing the fact that there is a whole business case out there, and they actually travel longer and spend more, right? So, and more, and it lies not in, perhaps not even not in wanting to do it, but more in ignorance and lack of awareness. They don't know that people with disabilities also want to travel. It's like, you know, people with disabilities are considered asexual, or they are considered not to have fun or to lead an equitable life like everyone else. They're not considered that they would like to travel the whole world just like anyone else. So it's just a societal perception that people with disabilities don't travel. But when they see it, like, you know, it's just ignorance. You have to tell them that they travel, And if you are welcoming enough, they would travel. The challenges then lies in accessibility that is there in the built environment, in technology, in communication, and that because it's not ingrained in the DNA, it takes some bit of effort to start with. So I think the biggest challenge lies there. And one correction, Peggy, when you introduced me, my dad is blind and mother is a wheelchair user. So you
I'm
need to
sorry.
change that.
Thank
So
you.
no
Thank you for
problem.
correcting that.
Yeah.
I
So
would agree that inertia is a really powerful force. I've worked for and with destinations, and you really have to shake people up and say, wait a minute, you're overlooking X, Y, or Z. Margie, you had some interesting comments on this topic the other day.
Yeah, I want to just chime in here and completely agree with everything everyone has said so far. As a travel professional, I have spent the last 15 years advocating for travelers for whatever their needs are. And sometimes it's a matter of destinations, hotels, tour operators, and everybody involved in ensuring that these visitors are having a wonderful time, understanding that some of these things are going to go outside the scope of your job. They're going to go outside the scope of company policy. They're going to go beyond the things that you've considered before, because every visitor that shows up, whether they are a marginalized group of people, whether they're a disabled group of people, or have a disability of some sort, there's a need there that is not going to fit the policies you've written, is not going to fit the scope of your job duty, but the needs are still there. And the idea that we're having a conversation today about this whole topic means that there's work to do. And I think that just realizing that a lot of this goes outside of the scope of what we've considered normal boundaries, but things that are very necessary to do are things we have to consider here. We have to have this conversation and open up this topic to talk about what are the needs of those visitors, what things might we be expected to do, and how do we care for them better.
I think that's a perfect segue to the next topic we're going to address, and that is how important is it at a company or a destination or any other entity that is involved in welcoming visitors and serving visitors to have buy-in from the top of the company. The people you just spoke of, Margie, when you said it may not be part of your job, may not be the decision makers traditionally. So is it bottom up? Is it top down? Is it how do you see it working in the industry segments you're involved with?
It gets interesting because if it's not starting at the top, if it's not starting in the executive level, then you've got a group of employees, a group of people who are forced to figure it out for themselves and decide if this is something they can do or not do. In my mind, it's a question of it being a full 360 kind of effort, with someone in the executives levels making sure that they know that our company has these initiatives, that we're looking at this as a company and not individually as employees, but as a company. And that these are things that we do want to, measures that we do want to take, and things we do want to move forward in doing, and keep our minds and ears and eyes open to what we need to do to ensure that anybody that's coming here has a wonderful time. So for preferably, I'd love it to start top up, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And when it doesn't, you still have employees who are faced with, what do we do?
Hey,
Billy, how have you seen this over your many years with 72 countries involved?
I think it's hard to start to both start and really gain traction in any initiative in this industry without buy-in and support from senior management. I think one of the things that's been most interesting in the past few months, particularly around race and Black Lives Matter and destinations looking at Black travelers in many cases for the first time, has been the attention of senior management and the leaders of DMOs and companies coming out and putting a stake in the ground to say this is important. I mean, that said, there are a lot of initiatives that start lower down. You know, in the LGBT market, it was really the work of primarily salespeople at airlines and hotels who built a network of gay travel agents who moved a lot of business. And it was the awareness of that business that got the attention of senior management. So I think there's a part to play in both sides. I think it takes people within an organization to recognize the opportunities and the challenges, and to bring them to the attention of management, to try and make progress in places where they have the ability to do so. But I think to really gain traction and move, you need commitment and often budget, let's face it, from senior management to make things happen.
Neha, I see you nodding, and you've made the point in your earlier comments about needing to have a business case for, in your case, reaching out to disabled travelers and encouraging them to travel, and telling and making people understand that this may not be their expectations. Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. I think when it comes to, so, when you're starting from the lower down approach, you are dependent on an instance. If it's instance based, like, for one traveler or, a few guests, it's fine. But if you have to get this inclusion into the DNA of the company or the host or whatever the entity that is involved, you have to go from the top down, because in any entity, there are 100 people. All 100 people might not be sensitive to the needs of the guest, right? So there might be only a percentage of people who are sensitive towards the need. You identify them, you work with them, but then people keep on moving, people keep on shifting. So you really cannot depend on that the next time a guest goes there who has a disability would be treated the same way. So the experience cannot be standardized. So it can start from there to set an example to the leadership who is in this case otherwise not willing to make a change. But once you put them as a successful business case, it is easy to convince them that this is something you ought to do for a bigger market that has been untapped. Then they are ready to invest, because any employee or any team member won't be able to take a decision on the investment side. That has to come from the leadership to make the change. Right. So I think it goes hand in hand, sometimes from the lower down approach and sometimes from the top bottom. So in my experience, I have, worked out both ways. It's just like hacking the system, especially in a country like in India, where there was no ecosystem to actually tell people and convince them there is a market and there are travelers that need to come to your place and you need to host them. You need to be ready to host them. So in that case, it was like whatever works, you got to make it happen. So whatever approach works. But at the end of the day, the leadership needs to be involved when, you're looking at a long-term change perspective.
Donna L., it sounds very much like Chattanooga is exactly in the top down, but maybe bottom up or sides up mode. Is that right?
I'm going to agree and disagree in several ways. I'm going to tell you our leader is fierce, and yes, he is definitely on board. But I do want to say, I guarantee that everybody that's actually on this panel, we've had these conversations before all of the injustice happened in May, right? So not to agree. So we have been having these ongoing conversations with every single department, everybody we've engaged with our communities. And even though that we've been having these conversations, sometimes it's hard for people to really get the why. And that's what I love about our leader at Chattanooga Tourism Company. He understood the why, but the goal is to get everybody else on board. So I'm going to agree with what everybody said. Sometimes it's hard to be the last person because you're like reiterating what people said, but you have to have it from top down. And we think about our leaders are great and they know the direction that they want to go and they're saying it, but it has to be ongoing. And then you have to make sure that it's embedded in different departments too. I've noticed, we have our conferences and hoteliers and our meetings, and then you have your marketing, and then you have the brand awareness side of things. But we want to make sure during that process that if you don't have diversity at the top, what's the point of your leader continuously saying, I believe in DEI if it's not diverse? So that's when you go to, it's called managing up. That's when you consistently have your individuals that are diverse from all walks of life, that are whether it's accessibility, whether it's LGBTQ plus, you know, Latino community. You have to constantly make an effort to have that communication, because if you don't have a communication, there's going to be a miss. And bottom line is economic mobility. Everybody screams when it comes to money, and that's pretty much what it is. It's the right thing to do. Yeah, we know that. Sometimes we know the right thing to do, but it's all about how much money can we bring in to impact our communities in which we serve. And also, how can we create a different light so different people can travel and they're aware of your destinations and they want to be there and they feel comfortable when they're there.
Donna, you've actually segued beautifully into our next topic, which is the conflict between giving lip service to all of this and actually making it happen. You've addressed some of the things that I suspect were not general, but things that Chattanooga is undertaking under your leadership. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, or shall I talk to others?
This is perfect. I absolutely love where our whole team, our entire team is going. So one of the things that we've started is an internal DEI council. So we have someone from every different department that's on this DEI council. And then also we've started these inclusive marketing initiatives that, of course, my fearless leader said, you know what, Donna, this is something I know you're passionate about. So we hear a lot of people talking about what they want to do, but you have to lead. And I have also have had, you know, we're talking about putting a statement out. Should people put a statement out? What does that statement look like? One of the statements that I want to say today is that we have to have open conversation and communication and be okay with being uncomfortable during this time, because we have all this data, we have all these surveys. And one of my favorite shows, I love to give an example, is Family Feud. And they say, survey says 100 people say this. So we get all this data, we get all this information, and we're under the assumption that LGBTQ plus wants to do this. Blacks want to do this. You know, wheelchair accessible, people want to do this. But if you don't have the conversations within your community, and you don't also have those conversations to people that are visiting the city, then it's going to be ongoing lip service. It's going to be ongoing, we support you. But you have to have a long-term strategy that can catapult you into a position where partners are thriving with professional development, because I got to say this, and before I just keep going into a tangent. One of the things that we've always heard people say, do we want to lead DEI? Should tourism companies be the leader in this? I've heard that from several different people. And I'm going to say, we don't have to be our community leaders as a whole. But in the lane that we are in, we need to be so strong in it and show so much support in it. And how do we do that? So if you come to a restaurant in Chattanooga, and just say if it's a Latin-owned restaurant, and we want to tell visitors about it because they love those authentic places. Y'all know what I'm talking about, the little hole in the walls. But I want to have a journalist that comes in and I want to share their website, and it doesn't look necessarily like it needs to be. Sometimes we throw people away when it comes to that. And we can't do that anymore. This is the time, as far as when it comes to DMOs, for us to really support those organizations and help them with those marketing efforts. And we don't want to wait to the last minute to engage with those underserved and underrepresented communities and wait till we do it then. We should be having those relationships now, and it should be embedded. Talk is cheap. People can say they love D&I, but you have to actually get out there, serve the community, and you have to show that through all of your marketing efforts and every single effort that you're doing.
Margie, you had a good example the other day of a place that was marketing itself, in your case, as I recall, to Black travelers, but on the ground, people were not feeling welcome. Do you want to describe that a little bit?
Yeah, just a real good example of something very similar to this is there's a historic resort property on a Caribbean island. And when you get into it, there's a lot of history on the island with slavery. And when you walk into this particular property, there are paintings around on the walls. that show Black people serving the plantation owners, basically all white. And all of the paintings that are around are in areas that, as a guest, you would frequent often. You come into this same building for cocktails in the evening. You come to this same building for dinner, breakfast, lunch. It's a central kind of meeting place, a gathering place. And the property owner, he is not racist at all, but he feels like he is sharing the history and heritage of that particular plantation. He'll gladly take you out to the tree out on the property where the slaves were whipped. It's appalling in a sense to have to deal with this every time you come to breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or when you decide you want to come have a drink. And doesn't matter how many times we've had conversations with him about it, it's history for him. It's not offensive, it's history. We've said, put it in a separate room, make it a little museum of the history of the property, but don't confront me with it every single day. We're talking really about, lip service and how people are moving forward with these sort of initiatives. And I can tell you, even in the same respect right now, what's going on, there was an article this morning about whether the whole Black Lives movements for corporations was a movement or was it a moment? Everybody threw up a black square on their social media page and now the conversations are done. It's done. There were no initiatives, there were no nothing. It was a moment for them. And we're back to, feels like, the drawing board, trying to get people to understand the need to advocate for visitors, the need for DEI and why that's important. We took it from a movement to a moment in a heartbeat, and now we're on to something else.
Well, let's hope everybody on this call and participating in the conference is going to help change it back into a movement, Margie. That was a great example. Neha, anything that you'd like to add to that discussion about people who may be giving lip service, or in Margie's case, committed personally, but not demonstrating it in a very good way or a very positive way?
Yeah, so here is the thing. So like when it comes to, guests with disabilities, there are a couple of things. One, disability is often just thought of, okay, only people with wheelchairs. So they say, okay, we have a ramp, we are accessible, and that is it. But there are two parts to it. There are a tangible part and there is an intangible part to it, right? So there are people with other disabilities. For them, accessibility means a lot of things, which we are not even looking at. And the sensitivity and empathy that is required to be treated travelers with disabilities as dignified travelers, like not treating them with sympathy or giving them a special treatment, which they don't want. They just want to be treated like any other traveler who happen to have a disability. So when they are talking, okay, we are accessible and welcoming, they are still not treating them equally. Like they are still doing, okay, we have just limited number of rooms, and in those limited number of disabled friendly rooms, it's only wheelchair accessible. There are no provisions for accessibility for other disabilities. They haven't even gone the thought out there. And most of the time, these rooms are just for the compliance sake. Like they want to get a star rating, and that is why they exist. The rooms don't exist because they want to cater to travelers with disabilities. So here lies a big gap, that it's just a lip service, and sometimes they really want to make a change. Oh, we'll do it wherever we can, but we are not doing it in the long run. And we are not training our staff or sensitizing them how to cater to people with disabilities. We actually, as a company, have to go and train the hotel staff at our own cost, because we don't want the experiences of the travelers to go bad. So we give them a checklist and rules that this is how you got to do.
That's a real public service in itself, Neha. Billy, I'm going to toss it to you because training and education is your expertise. If you can give us some comments about LGBTQ that might apply to other markets as well, that would be wonderful.
Sure. I mean, the lip service in the LGBTQ market is very similar to what Neha has talked about. And particularly because the gay male market has been known to be such a valuable niche segment, and the gay and lesbian segment, very, very valuable. Um, we've kind of reached sort of peak rainbow in the last year. June now, everybody creates a rainbow logo, and they're all visible for that 1 month, much in the same way that they're visible during Black History Month with Black issues, and then kind of disappear for the rest of the year. And there's increasingly pushback in our community, and particularly because destinations and brands were gay friendly, then they were gay and lesbian friendly. Now they're LGBTQ plus friendly because that's what we're calling the community. But most have no idea who the T or the Q or any of the identities that come under the plus are. And so, a few years ago, about 5 years ago at Hospitable Me, we had recommended sensitivity training to one of our strategy clients. And they asked if we would do it. And it was a life-changing experience for us because we realized that though their staff hadn't really had problems with gay and lesbian customers, they were retreating from engaging with them because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. They didn't quite know what to do. And we really see this in the luxury market. 9 times out of 10, I check into a hotel and they send an amenity to the room and it's addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Kolber. And for a moment I freak out thinking, what are my parents doing here? And then I realize, they just made a mistake. And I'm going to drink the champagne. Very few people will, complain that their free bottle of champagne came with a note that was misaddressed. But it says one of two things. It says you paid no attention to me from the moment I walked into me and my husband from the moment we walked into your property, or you have no idea who I am. And when you're talking about brands that promise personalized, authentic service, like that just doesn't cut it. The bar is set so low. And what we often tell our clients is because that bar is so low, there's so much opportunity to do better. And I think for us, in terms of presenting this conversation to clients and potential clients and talking to destinations and brands around the world as we do, the win is that there's an opportunity to do better in this underserved market that becomes both very loyal and very socially networked. I know for sure that it's that way in the queer market because for years that was the only way we could get information. That was the only way we could find out if a place was welcoming and friendly and safe. And I think in the disability market it's the same thing. Like people have to ask their friends. You can be ADA compliant and be totally inappropriate for somebody in a power chair. So it's not like you can find this stuff out easily without networking. And so I think these communities, it's true in the Black community as well. And the Green Book, the Green Motorist Guide, which dates back to the 30s and ended in the 60s when the Damron Address book started up kind of doing the same thing for queer people, just relaunched a month ago. There's a new ABC Green Book because Black travelers and African American travelers want to connect with Black culture and Black history around the world, and the destinations and the brands aren't providing it. And so, I think to look back at the earlier conversation, I think particularly what Donna L was saying, you need to show that there's a market there, and you need to show that there's an upside to doing the right thing. And we look at that in two ways. One is you're going to build new business, and this is good new business because it's people who haven't been, people who are eager to share places where they haven't been, and eager to share a welcoming experience that is frighteningly and saddeningly so rare in so many places, right? And then also, you have a younger generation of travelers who are much more motivated to do business with places and companies that share their values. And for millennials and Gen Z, inclusion and equality and equity are really, really important. So it's not just the Black travelers and the gay travelers and the disabled travelers. It's their friends, it's their families who are all in tune to these same discussions. So I think that, I can go on and on about training. I don't even think we need to talk, I don't even want to spend that much time here talking about it. I think the more important thing to talk about is how you sell that into a destination, how you sell that into a brand, how you sell the idea of diverse markets, underrepresented markets, being not just the right thing to do, but being a profitable thing to do.
That's that business case again. And when you do, I want to add one question about training though, Billy, and that is the fact that there's so much turnover in the hospitality industry. And if you are training staff, particularly in consumer facing positions in restaurants and hotels and that sort of thing, do you ever not, and this is DMOs often that are leading the training initiative, as I Love New York did, doing training for gas station attendants and toll takers and the people who actually meet the visitors that many of us are marketing to, but not necessarily getting to know face to face. Is that training ever done? Is it, are we going to be fortunate enough with this next generation that it is going to be so imbued in who they are and their culture and their family and their friends that the training won't be as necessary? What do you think? You're smiling.
I don't think it will ever be done. I think it will be less necessary, but I think the bigger win, you know, and we do follow-up trainings, and you know, we're on a 3-year schedule with one of our clients to come in and do everybody again, you know, 3 years later. But it's the training is a piece of a larger shift in how we address the market. The training is necessary to go in and people can say, oh, these are the things I need to do to make Black travelers more welcome. These are the things I need to do to make disabled travelers more welcome. These are the things you can do to make queer people more welcome. People will start doing it. You know, we did training in Puerto Rico all over the island, and they were really worried when we started doing it that it wouldn't be well received outside of San Juan and Boca Raton, the places that have large queer populations. But it was really well received all over because hoteliers, no matter where they are, need to fill their beds. And when you tell them something that they can do that is relatively easy, that then allows them an advantage in the marketplace, they do it. And so I think when you go in and you do the training and you empower people to change the way they do business, it's not about telling people, you know, this is where the line is drawn. It's about teaching people why there are lines, why people feel unwelcome, why people feel ignored, why people feel uncomfortable or afraid. And when you do that, you don't need to keep training the same thing over and over. You're changing the relationship of the service provider to diverse guests. And once you do that, it builds on itself.
We've got some time for a couple of examples of both people and entities, destinations, hotel companies that are doing a great job of incorporating all of this. And Neha, I'll be interested in some comments with you, because with the disabled traveler, there's often a budget line that's necessary to make those accommodations. In other cases, it's more attitudinal, and maybe some education in a broader community that is not directly involved in tourism to help them understand why this is good for their community overall. But let's talk about a few examples that you might have. I'm going to toss it to you first, Neha, and then I'm going to come to you, Donna L. And Margie, you had quite a number of them on both sides. So over to you, Neha.
Yeah. So I think it's about how willing people are to welcome all sorts of guests, right? It's about the intent and ethics a lot of the time. So, you know, you need to find the right set of people whom you want to work with. So fortunately, here we have found a few hotel chains who have been really welcoming. I'll give you a very great example. So when we launched the first ever rafting tour in India for people with disabilities, so the Ganges River where it's done, there was no property which had disabled friendly rooms, right? So there was no property as where I could, you know, take wheelchair users and they could stay overnight and have a few rounds of rafting. But the company the adventure travel company whom we designed the program with, they had a property. They still have a property. So the guy said, if it's not there, we'll make it happen. You won't believe that guy broke his staircase. He widened the doors all in a week's time to make 2 rooms accessible. Just because he said that why not we should do it. I see no reason not to do it. And you know, the amazing part is, I won't say amazing is not the right word. A couple of years later, his father himself became a wheelchair user due to a spinal condition. And that time he said, we did the right thing, because this is something anyone can happen to become part of any time. So disability is a minority. It takes one accident and you are part of that minority in that moment. So that's one great example. And there is another hotel chain in India who very focus on responsible travel and sustainability. So they don't use any plastics and they don't use any, like, it's self-contained. They grow their own vegetables, and they're one of the most expensive hotel properties in the country. They have been very agile in terms of whatever the type of guest have been coming in and asking. They have been adapting themselves over the years. So once a guest comes in and they say, okay, this room is not favorable for my type because it's just a standard room, I need a suite. So there's, okay, we'll make a suite which is accessible for everyone. So this is the kind of willingness to cater, to cater to the guests of all types that is needed. And they do brilliant business. People come to them like every year. There are people who are in the last 20 years of the property have come to them 30 times. That's real great business for them.
Yeah, there's nothing like repeat business and loyal customers. And interestingly enough, it's the business case, but as you pointed out, it can also be a personal experience. You had one yourself. The operator that you mentioned soon had a family member and helped him realize even more deeply, I'm sure, exactly how beneficial that was. Donna L., any comments with Chattanooga or your personal travels where you've encountered entities that were willing or already had done something and others who just weren't making the mark?
You know, I've been to a lot of cities, Peggy, where once you enter the city, the people are diverse, but the people that are on the front lines they don't know anything about being diverse. And I think Billy touched that a lot. And what I've noticed in one particular city, and I have really modeled my position after all that they do, and that is Chicago. And the reason why I say that they've done it well is because they always have it embedded in every facet of their work. So whether it is, and I'm thinking about from the marketing perspective, because I absolutely love inclusive marketing. And we've actually started that a little bit in Chattanooga, and I want to share that. But it's ongoing. So you see constant blogs about LGBTQ+. You see constant blogs on accessibility, in different things that you wouldn't typically think about. So it looks like they're not necessarily outsourcing it. They have somebody that's in-house and having constant communication. Now, I've been places where you get to a certain location and I'm like, hey, where are these particular restaurants? Or I would love to know more about the Latin culture here. And they have no brochures. They have absolutely nothing. And I don't want to point those destinations out. But for me, I want to be able to get to know those, as we always say in tourism, those authentic experiences. So I want to come back for more. One thing that we did, and I was very proud of our team, was with our new marketing efforts, we made sure that we had diverse people in our videos. Now, we didn't go over beyond where it didn't look realistic, because, you know, I've seen people do that. Oh, let's put a lot of diverse people, and everybody's looking like, that doesn't look like, you know, a normal day. And sometimes it's a little bit too much. But what I've actually, I can say Chattanooga can pride themselves on is that they're more open to working with diverse vendors. That's important. You know, sometimes it's about who you know, and not only just that, building those relationships with the different organizations that are in the community. So when it's time for a video shoot or a photo shoot, or it's time for content and print and things like that, we're making sure that we are intentional with our entire team, where inclusive marketing just doesn't lie on me. That means that everybody in our department is willing to make sure that they go over and beyond to have those diverse assets. Because if I'm the only one writing blogs about 5 ways to experience Black culture. That's a disservice when a journalist comes in, because guess what? The person that they talk to, they have no clue what that blog was about. But informing the team on a regular basis, and when I see DMOs do it very well, most of the time they're doing it very well is because of constant communication. And this is the uncomfortable thing. I mentioned that earlier. It is an uncomfortable thing sometimes, but if you don't have that constant communication, like Billy mentioned earlier, then there's going to be a true miss, and it won't be longevity in this. It will be just lip service, as we said earlier.
You're absolutely right. And one of the things I was always proud of with I Love New York, in the days when you didn't have the internet, you had a printed brochure every year, was that as a matter of routine, there were, of course, New York State is a very diverse entity to start with, but it was very representative. Neha, we did have people in wheelchairs because some disabilities are a little hard to illustrate, but there was always a Black family or a Hispanic family or some diversity that was not necessarily existent in the media, in the marketing materials for other destinations way back in the 70s and 80s. And I think that it's absolutely critical that people are able to see themselves as a potential visitor. You talked about journalists, and I just want to give one example of a destination we've worked with, which does a blog. I'm actually starting to wonder how many people are actually reading blogs these days in the day of podcasts and everything else, all the other media. But what we helped them arrange to do was have blog posts by journalists who represented those communities. So it wasn't just coming from the marketing team, as you pointed out, from the DMO, it was coming from a journalist who had been there to that community and could speak authoritatively about what was relevant to that particular market. Sometimes it was culinary as well as other kinds of diversity, but I think that is often interesting to all of us. We even had a beer expert do a couple of blog posts on beer. So Margie, you had quite a number of examples of both hotels and destinations that were not doing such a good job and some that were. And so let's hear a little bit more about those.
So let me tell you about the ones that didn't do a great job. And I think they're perfect examples of what we're talking about here. So I have a client who, her and her spouse are both blind, and they travel independently very, very well. They don't need a lot of assistance. They manage to do everything we do with a little bit of guidance, and then they're great by themselves. And they had grown pretty fond of a particular resort and were traveling there, made their first trip there the first time with me. And I booked the trip for them, and we needed to make some preparations and let the property know that they were arriving. They had a butler, so they had someone to take care of some of the basic needs. But what became problematic is when they went to go to the beach, the butler escorted them to the beach the first time. And this particular property had some rules set against reserving chairs and all of that. You couldn't reserve chairs. And we requested that they reserve the same 2 chairs for this client, because if you do that, they can get back and forth from their rooms to the beach to their specific chairs without any assistance. They don't need the butler, they don't need anyone. And the property refused. It was their policy. Again, we're talking about, going outside of the lines, and they just refused to do it. They refused to allow these 2 individuals to have the same 2 chairs because it was against their policy. Made it difficult for their trip, because now you've got to rely on somebody to escort you back and forth. And quite honestly, it was a bit offensive to them because they're independent travelers. They didn't need all of that. Take us once, we will figure out how to get there, and then we can do it ourselves, is how they kind of travel. And they just refused to do that. Consequently, the same property was having an event on the beach one evening, and their butler went off duty at a particular time. They refused to allow them to stay longer than the butler's shift because there would be nobody to escort them back to the room, which was beyond me that this would be problematic because you have staff everywhere. But they would not take that extra step. Nobody wanted to take responsibility. Maybe there was some fear in that because they don't have blind travelers very often. I don't know what was that motivating factor for not allowing them to just step outside of the lines, just color outside the lines for a moment and understand that these people love your property, and they want to have a good time just like everybody else does. They're not children. They don't need to be held by the hand and escorted around. You don't need to be fearful. All of that played into this issue. And maybe it's a matter of training. Maybe it's a matter of overall them preparing for visitors who aren't like the rest of us. Maybe it's that. But it made for a very difficult first experience for them on this property, simply because they were blind. Nobody could get past that. And we've got policies and no, you can't do this, go back to your room. It was pretty horrific for them. So I would love to see as a whole, the industry shift that mindset. I know we've got some fears centered around some things like this, but you've got to take the lead from the client. You've got to take the lead from the visitor, and not pull out your own concerns and fears and worries about things of this nature. In a similar in a similar situation, there is a company that does. I won't even say. There's a company that the question was asked whether or not they had any African American tours, because as Billy mentioned before, you know, there's some familiarity there that we're looking for. There's some connecting with culture and heritage that you want to do when you're traveling. And the best they could offer were, we could take you to some cotton fields and some plantations. You just, I almost have to stop and take a breath to tell you that, because if that's the best you can do, we have a serious problem if that's the best you can offer me. Not understanding what you offer in your own destinations, not understanding the culture and the history that's there, not making sure that when I go, I'm safe, I'm comfortable, I'm enjoying the experience, it's a place I should be, it's history I should know. Yeah, we're doing a huge disservice by leaving all of this out, Peggy, just a huge disservice.
I agree. And I think that as there is broader communication and travelers, or a lot of individual travelers, by the way, and I'm sure you found this, don't really understand what a DMO does. And so they don't often go to DMO websites. They'll go to TripAdvisor. They don't often go to DMO websites. And we found this again and again, which is why DMOs have to be so active on social media these days, to let the individual traveler provide the information that that they need, but they don't really know how to get. TripAdvisor can be very helpful. They're usually very frank, but you know, there are problems with all of those. And I often feel that in your first example, where they were infantilizing those blind travelers, that often those policies are coming from a legal division, where there's a fear of litigation or a fear of, you know, they're going to spread the word on social media that they fell and nobody helped them and that sort of thing. And there's something to be said for that, but that needs also to be incorporated into the discussion and the overarching need of people today to travel. I mean, you know, I think, Neha, you probably know better than any of us about disabled travelers and the fact that they are changing, not just somebody's father developing a spinal problem, but there are a lot of young people here today who have either served in the military and been severely injured, or have been very active and have had some sort of a sports injury. And so it's not just an older population that needs this kind of support and this kind of help. And so do you see, you said that there were no solutions and you are one solution, but do you see other solutions for disabled travelers in particular that you've found since you've started your own company?
So, like there are solutions. If I have to say, like if globally there have been few, small outfits, but they are focusing on one single disability, right? So it's like a travel company for wheelchair users or the travel company for blind users. So, but isn't it another form of discrimination that you are putting people into set of groups based on the disability that they have? Okay, you are blind, you travel here, and you are deaf, so you travel here, or you are a wheelchair user, you travel here. Why can't we all travel together and make disability just a human feature, right? Instead of making it as a basis of putting people into separate groups. And this is
Done.
one thing.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So this is one thing that I have found really, people still come and ask me that why do you do all travelers, like all disabilities? Isn't it challenging? But you know what? That is the only way that we have to see true inclusion. That is the only way I see inclusion as, because otherwise we would always be putting people into groups based on disability or your race or your sexual preference or whatsoever. And there are intersectionalities involved everywhere. There is say a black gay autistic person who wants to travel, for that matter, right? So in that case, what would you do? So you have to focus towards, as an industry, that we all are inclusive for all set of travelers. We cannot always put them into separate set of groups. And this is where I think we're the only company in the world who is doing that, even after so many years since we started, just because it's not easy.
It isn't easy. And of course, many people have touched on the fact that people don't travel in categories. You know, you may be traveling on a girlfriend's getaway and, you know, Margie, your girlfriends are not all Black. And some of them may be disabled and some of them may be older and some of them may be younger. I travel in a family group with my mother at times, who was using a walker. And my cousin and his now husband, it took 30 years, but they finally got married last year, were always with us. So, you know, they had no issues whatsoever because they were the ones in the suite that we all went to visit. As your earlier point, Billy, that the LGBTQ, especially gay men, are affluent travelers and often very welcome. But I think it is really important that all travelers, we sort of need to go through this period, I think, of focusing on the needs of particular groups and then integrating it all. I'd be interested in your perspective, Donna L., as Chattanooga is ramping up this effort, if there are certain target groups that you've decided that you're going to put some effort behind, and because you can't do everything at once. How's that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, we cannot do everything at once, but I want to do everything at once. I want everybody to feel welcome to come to Chattanooga, but we have different market segments that we're going to target. And of course, that is African-American, LGBTQ plus. Also, we want to make sure that we have Latin community and veterans, and who else did I miss? Those are our main targets. And accessible. How can I miss accessibility?
And there could be a lot of overlap between those targets too.
And there's going to be a lot of overlap. You know, I did mention my analogy of Family Feud earlier, and I want to go back to that analogy again, because this was the reason why I said it. It's because when it comes to the data, we are going to find out the interest, the overall interest of LGBTQ plus, African Americans, accessible. It's the overall interest. But even all the Black women that I hang out with, we don't like the same things. So we have to also understand that when it comes to marketing and creating these specific social media plans and strategies, we have to make sure that we are continuous and intentional about marketing to us as far when it comes like to overall. I know that Family Feud analogy is you think about 100 people were surveyed. Yeah, but who were those 100 people? Who were those 2 billion people that were surveyed that were LGBTQ plus? We have to be really, really mindful of what we believe, what people want to do. Open it all up. I know that Chattanooga, we're really known for the outdoors, but it might be people that come here and they may want to experience our arts and culture assets as well. So we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity and have a choice on what they want to be a part of. And if we don't do that, we're going to have a big miss. And also some people are going to be offended. So can you imagine, what I love about our team members now is that they call me I don't have all the answers when it comes to African Americans or LGBTQ plus or accessibility. I don't have those answers. I'm learning along the way. But the call was, and I love her because the call was, it was a great call. A journalist is coming in. Donna, I know you said that when it comes to African Americans, they really love Black history. They really love Black owned and local, and that's true. But we have to be careful, because if the woman wants to come see the beautiful outdoors in Rock City and take her family to all of our different attractions and destinations, we don't want to say something inoffensive and say, by the way, the Black owned businesses are here. This is where I want you to go. We want to be really strategic about that while we're setting the stage. It's a way to say it, and it's called manners. So we can't just assume, boom, LGBTQ plus. You said, and actually, Billy, you told us this, so I want to say thank you. Everybody's in North Shore. If a journalist reached out to me from a particular magazine, I don't want to send them to a particular area in our city and offend them initially if that's not what they've asked for. So we got to have communications within your teams that you're working with these destinations, but you also have to know that it's a tricky situation, and you want to be mindful while you're working with people not to offend them during this process.
I think you've hit on a good point, Donna Ellen, and others touched on it earlier, and that is the danger of stereotyping. And it's also that placing people into buckets and thinking that, you know, the bucket has rigid sides, it can't expand like a kiddie pool for children or something. And it's something that is, I think we all tend to do a little bit of it. I catch myself doing it too sometimes because it's easy. It's kind of the default, and you know how to handle that. But it's really, the wonderful thing is that it's stretching all of us as human beings to endeavor to move into this space. Yes, Billy.
Donna's point is so important, and I think it works in a couple different directions. You know, I've been on many LGBTQ press tours, and I can remember once being taken to a Hamburger Mary's, which is a gay hamburger chain in Tampa, and I'm like, you have all these great restaurants in Tampa. I can go to a Hamburger Mary's anywhere. Why are you taking me here? And you can't assume that because somebody is gay, they want to go to a gay bar or a gay restaurant, or because somebody's Black, that their priority is going to a Black-owned restaurant. It might be. Likewise, don't only promote your Black-owned restaurants to Black people. One of the things I talk about in our training all the time is, you know, in Amsterdam, there's a Homo monument. If that's around the corner from your hotel, tell everybody, because I know it's there, and I don't care that it's there. But if my mom were there, she'd go and take a selfie and send it to me and tell me how cool it was that the concierge at the hotel told her about it. So, you know, I think, and, you know, to Naz's point earlier, somebody could be disabled and gay and Black. Like, you can't make assumptions about what they want based on any of those. And it may not, you know, one trip, one might be important, and the next trip, the other might be important. Yeah, if you're going to Montgomery, Alabama, you may be there very interested in African-American history. But if you're going to Atlanta, you may just want to go party and shopping. So understanding that all of our guests are diverse in many different ways, and that all of our guests might be interested in all of the diversity in our places and products is the way to move forward with you know, particularly when you're talking about content and journalists. You know, ask journalists what, you know, these are the things that we think are really compelling about our destination. What are the things that move you? What are the things that interest you? You know, and I think there's so little that's often done between PR professionals who feel like they have to promote the things that the destination or the brand is focused on, when you can have so much more impact focusing on the things that your visitor or your journalist is interested in.
That is absolutely essential. As somebody who's been in that role for many, many years, I would say one of the constraints sometimes, and this is a constraint from the DMO, if it's a membership bureau, and there's an expectation that because they're members, and sometimes they're you know, big dollar members, that they are going to be in every press trip, and the range of 3 top hotels are always going to be the ones where the journalists stay. But I think I'm going to flip your point about working with journalists to working with visitors too. And I think there's a certain responsibility on the part of the visitor to think consciously about what they want to do and to communicate that to their hotel, to the concierge, when they talk and ask, you know, when they ask for restaurant recommendations or other things to see and do. And again, this is sort of a training issue, I think, Billy, too, to get those consumer-facing people aware of the fact that they may be asked about these things, and to be sure that they have some way of recommending the things that are going to be best suited to the needs of that particular traveler. We've reached the point at which we were going to turn this over to questions and answers. And Ronnie, I see you're still there, and I've been monitoring the chat, and I see there have been a lot of comments, but not a lot of questions. But I'd like to toss it to you, Ronnie, to simplify my life a little bit and see if you can pick out a couple of questions there that the panelists might well address.
I actually would love questions or comments from everybody. We can turn this into a more of an open dialogue. Is there anybody who wants to, and if I want to give a few seconds for anybody who wants to come on video or audio to say or ask or whatever else. And if not, I think Cindy's question is a very good one, and I want to try to frame that a little more specifically. But is there anybody who wants to come on and state or ask something?
And address it to a particular panelist too, if you wish.
I'll just like to add to Peggy and Billy just said, like to everyone perhaps, it's just that we have to get over the bias that the hosts have and even the travelers have, and give everyone the freedom of choice, right? You know what Billy said, that, you know, everyone should have the freedom of choice, and the host should be ready to offer that choice to every sort of traveler beyond their own biases.
Great point.
So Cindy, this might be in a different direction than, I was actually going to say, I want to say something, and Cindy and Billy, if you can tack onto this, which is, I was talking to, once again, a nameless destination who wanted to do the right stuff and wanted to be representative and whatever, but they were very clear that what they wanted were the high spend visitors. That's what they cared about. They had concerns about over tourism and stuff. So some of it was couched within that discussion of, look, we can't have everybody come, so let's get the people with the most money. So I don't know, Cindy, if you want to add or reframe that, but I just would love to hear overall, when you're welcoming people over to a place, how do you address and deal with the fact that there are people who might not be there for the luxury highest ticket experiences? Cindy, if you want to add or reframe or whatever.
Sure. Can you guys see me? Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah, this has been a really thoughtful, like every panelist, I've been thinking, yes, like as you've been speaking, I totally agree. But one of the things that, you know, I think we really need to grapple with, especially with growing global inequalities, is this question around class. And this connects with so many of these historically marginalized communities. And so how do we address this? Because obviously there are scholarship programs that enable economically disadvantaged people to travel, but that sometimes separates out people who are economically disadvantaged. And so how do we think about that? And I don't expect anyone to have, you know, an answer to that per se, but it does intersect with many of the things that you've all been highlighting. And I just love to hear your thoughts and insights.
Cindy, I think, you know, sometimes we get offended when, you know, as he asked the question earlier about class and how much spending will we do and things like that. But I do want to say this, you do have to have a target audience. And what I mean by that is, we want to say, and I'm going to say any destination, and I'll use Chattanooga, Tennessee. We want to be a destination where there is something for everyone. And we know that everyone may not necessarily be able to afford everything. Some people may come over for an overnight visit. Some people may want to stay a week. And we have to understand everybody does not have the same income, and you should advertise and market to everyone. But we still have to also know there is a target range and a target audience. And I'm not offended by that per se, but I know some of my counterparts may be offended. So there's a specific hotel that I might not be able to afford or go to, but there are also other lower end hotels that I don't want to go to, and it's okay. So it's okay to have a target market and a target audience. It is all right. And I don't think anything is wrong with that personally, but we still have to say there's something for everybody's income. There's something here at your particular destination for everyone. And those high-end hotels may not be for everybody. Those attractions where they might cost too much, because sometimes you may not want to take 8 kids to an amusement park if you're having a field trip. It may be too costly. But if you have 2 kids, you might want to take them there. So you have to be mindful that some people are not offended when it comes to how you market your destination and based on economics. It's not to me, but I'm just speaking personally.
I'm actually going to use an example from the 6.5 years that I worked marketing South Africa as a destination. And that for American travelers is inherently a high cost destination simply because of the airfare. But within the community, within the whole wonderfully diverse country that South Africa is. And their marketing slogan, when I first started with them, was "A world in one country," which was not hyperbole. It was really true in terms of the tribal identities, the community identities, racially, ethnically, in every other way you can imagine. There is that range, but the American traveler is probably not going to explore that range completely. However, practically every tour operator will take them to one of the former townships like Soweto, which is an easy reach from Johannesburg. And that money is going into the community, which is really a wonderful thing, because that is often the other problem, which we don't have the scope to discuss in this panel, but very often the benefits of travel are not necessarily going into the local community. They're going to the owner, who may be in the United States or Europe or in some other place where, yes, salaries are going to the people who are employed there, but there isn't necessarily either an ownership or a commitment to give back to those communities. So I think that that is also something to be thought about when you think about target markets, because a lot of Americans are not going to go to Africa, East or Southern Africa at least, without going on safari. There's a whole range of ways you can do that. You can stay in Kruger National Park in Rondaville very inexpensively and drive your own car, or you can go on a very high-end customized safari. So I think it is important because people shift, individuals shift. You know, you may not have that much money when you're a young traveler and you have a different kind of experience. And as you get older and more affluent, or in the case of the recent recessions, older and less affluent, you may choose to travel in a different way. So I think that, you know, you make a really good point about the target markets. And as a destination, you have to focus on those. But as an individual, you may have a different perspective. So yes, Billy.
Peggy, I want to thank you for bringing up that topic. You know, in many respects, our industry is fueling the wealth inequity globally, because so much of the money we spend does not benefit the local population in the places where we go. In islands in the Caribbean, upwards of 70 to 90% of tourism dollars often flow off of those islands. And I think paying attention to where our dollars are actually benefiting is something that our industry really needs to provide transparency to and more attention to. And as travelers, I think there's a hunger to have travel benefit local communities more. But I want to turn back to the topic that Cindy brought up, because I come to it from a slightly different perspective. We at Hospitable Me about a year ago, we were delivering our Everyone Welcome training and realizing, you know, we're not really talking about everyone. We're talking about LGBTQ people. could we build a curriculum that talks about everyone? And for a year, we've been looking at 11 different forms of diversity. And socioeconomic status is one of them. And I think it's a real challenge. The perspective that I have on it is somebody who is not wealthy should still feel welcome. And even, I look at like high-end hotels, and I think, my sister, for special event, special anniversary, stayed at the Four Seasons in New York. She can't afford to eat there, she can't afford to order room service, but wanted to have this night of luxury. And when people who don't have economic means are made to feel like you can't afford anything here, or you're not welcome here, or made to feel uncomfortable about the fact that they don't have the money for dinner there, and she was able to get, this particular hotel, she was able to get a local restaurant recommendation nearby that was, a cool Thai place and, super cheap. I think those are the kinds of things when we're talking about welcoming people who aren't affluent, and I think Donna pointed to it as well. We have something here for everyone. It's one thing to say, like San Francisco, we don't have enough hotel rooms, so we're only going to market to people who can spend $500 a night. Those are the only people we're interested in bringing in. But to the people who are coming in, you're welcome here, you're wanted here, we have the resources for you to enjoy yourself here. Those, I think, are things that tourism has an obligation to do.
I want to point out a pioneer that many of you may have heard of, and I've actually had the pleasure of meeting him, and that is Arthur Frommer, who was the author of the very famous Europe on $5 a Day right after World War II. And his position is that a vacation should be seen as a human right in the same category as perhaps not as housing and food and other aspects, but that a vacation is not only a respite from your day-to-day work, but, and we all know this, it's broadening your perspectives. You're meeting new people that you wouldn't meet in your ordinary day-to-day life. And though he has stepped back from active involvement in the industry, his daughter, Pauline Frommer, is still carrying on that legacy. And I think it's an important point to keep in mind, because vacations are often seen as luxurious or as a luxury, but they really are. And all of us know this when we just even do a weekend getaway to a different part of our own state or even our own city. Our eyes have been opened to something that that we wouldn't have known otherwise. I'm fortunate enough to live in Tucson, Arizona, which has been an unofficial sanctuary city. So here we are in Southern Arizona, which is thought of as conservative, and we have Ethiopian restaurants and Asian, various different types of Asian restaurants. And that's because of the immigrants who have come to our city. And that's another resource that we really have, and that Tucson, well, not this year, unfortunately, but they have a festival every year called Tucson Meet Yourself. And it's focused primarily through ethnic identities, but not completely, because of course all the food stalls may represent a cuisine that is pan-European or pan-global. And I think it's a wonderful thing, and I would love to see more communities explore, embrace, and really market that kind of diversity that exists within their community that will help as well. We're getting down to the last few minutes. I see we have about 7 minutes left, so I would like to see if we have any more questions, Ronnie, and if
We
not,
got Neha to
yeah, I was going
speak
to
for a
toss it
second.
to each of our panelists to have a concluding comment too.
Yeah, I think, yeah, if Neha could start, that'd be great.
Great.
I just wanted to add to answer to Cindy's question. I think Cindy's question also, and to add to what Billy said about money staying in the communities. So in terms of people who are not being able to afford, so I think I had a background where I had a time as in the childhood, we never had that much money. And since the time we have started the company, there's a gift to tour option, wherein anyone can gift a tour to anyone. It could be a stranger, or it could be someone they know who cannot afford to travel. So it has always been one of the principles that we want to pass it on to people, like primarily people with disabilities who otherwise cannot afford to travel. So someone else pays for them. So even we ask our travelers, okay, you are traveling, would you like to gift a tour to someone? So that might not be a 3-week vacation, just like what they're doing, but it might be a two-day weekend getaway for a disabled traveler who otherwise cannot able to take that vacation. So that sort of arrangement we have kept in to benefit the travelers who come from a weaker section economically. And regarding staying in the communities, I think India, for that matter, is way ahead. Like whatever I have seen globally in terms of implementing a lot of responsible tourism practices at the destinations. So there has been a lot of initiatives that the host communities, like because who are culturally very diverse, or there are art forms that they have been going for centuries, but people are either migrating to bigger cities for livelihood or not following those art forms because there's not enough money. Tourism is actually supporting them by taking travelers to them just as a visit, not as a commercial buying thing, but just making them visit and spending time with them, or seeing how that art form works, or how that fabric is woven, or taking them to a workshop, or taking them to a potter, how he makes it with hands. So this way the tourism is supporting these communities and the money stays in those communities.
Very, very important. And there are initiatives like Pack with a Purpose, which is widely done throughout Africa, where the community says, what do we need? And often it's just, please go to your local Costco and bring us a dozen pair of reading glasses or children's books or something of that sort. So they're community focused. So quickly, because we're really knocking down, getting to the end of the time. We have about 4 minutes left. This always happens when we have such a good topic and such wonderful panelists. Margie, I'm going to ask you to do a 1-minute wrap up of anything you'd like to say. And then I'm going to go to you, Billy, and Donna L., since you were our last panelist to join us, I'm going to give you the opportunity to wrap up the whole session. Margie. Margie, you're muted.
I'm talking to you and you can't even hear me. I won't even take a minute. I was just going to say this was a great panel and it was a great discussion. It gives us lots to think about, gives us lots to take back and maybe try to institute some change and push forth some initiatives and get some conversations going, even amongst those that we know and in our own circles and in our own companies and destinations. So this was very thoughtful. Every panelist had something wonderful to contribute, very eye-opening. And thank you so much for the opportunity. This was really fantastic.
Billy.
I just want to thank the participants for being so active in the chat. It was really refreshing to have such an engaged audience. My fellow panelists, you are such inspiring people. Peggy, you're the best Zoom moderator I have ever had. I wish I could have you on every Zoom call from here on out. And Ronnie and Romy for setting this up in Travel Unity. It's really been a great experience.
Donna L.
I am so thankful to be a part of this. I told the team in Chattanooga yesterday, I am so geeked about where it is heading, where everybody is. And I'm just so thankful to be on this panel. I want to leave everybody with this: support diverse businesses that are in your area, that are in our tourism lane. 2, empower our attractions and our partners to want to know more about DEI and tell them the why. 3, engage employees and community. And this is my favorite quote of the week, because I change them often, and it's by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It says, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." We need communication. We need to have the uncomfortable conversation, and we need to be open that everybody deserves to see the world and travel. That's what I got.
On that note, I think it's time to say goodbye to everyone because it's time for the next panel. And Ronnie, again, on behalf of all of us, thank you for including us all into planning this conference. I think we would all be ready to volunteer to do whatever you want us to do for a future one. Thank you so much to you and your team. There are a lot of people behind the scenes that are not visible today that help make this happen. Thank you all.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you to our panel. The link is there. If you have any questions, reach out, and that's it for now. So
Bye, everybody.
Bye now.
Thank you so much. It was
Thank
great.
you.